to share. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Sorry that we are 3 minutes behind, but I'm going to get done with the intro real quick so that we can let Martin have all the minutes that are left. So today we have a very interesting topic. I don't know if so many of you have been noticing semantic model within the Power BI service platform. So there is no more data sets. There's no more Power BI data sets. It's now semantic model. And we have today with us Martin Bubenheimer, and he's going to be taking us on the topic from requirements to a good semantic model. Okay. So this session is brought to you by your BizEdge and MHS Analytics. Your BizEdge is a consulting and data analysis training company in Nigeria. If you need any training and consulting on Power BI, Excel, financial modeling, reach out to us. We have a platform for digital resources. I will share. You can access free templates and exam mocks if you're trying to do a certification exam, and some free courses if you're interested. MHS Analytics is the Canadian entity, same services we provide, but just located in North America. So our speaker today is Martin Bubenheimer. Martin holds a diploma in computer science and started this journey with Siemens Healthcare. Also, I started my own journey with Siemens Nigeria. So that's a cool thing to have in common. Then he's worked for a lot of companies, and I think he's currently with GfK.
No, meanwhile, I'm with Daiichi Sankyo, which is a Japanese pharmacy company.
Oh, okay. Okay, apologies that
then the journey continued.
Okay, the journey continues. So I'm going to hand over to him real quick, but I'll share his LinkedIn in the chat so that you can connect with him. And so, Martin, over to you. I'll get off the screen and you can take over the screen share.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. I must say, upon your invite, I have watched a few of the videos from the playlist from previous sessions, and I must say that I'm really impressed by the high quality content that you have in there, and it's really useful sessions that I've seen there. So I might reference to some of them and not repeat of all of them. You know, let's get started with today's topic.
Thank you very much.
So, today we will not do much in Power BI or Power BI Desktop because what we are learning today is more about how to run a Power BI project so that your final outcome that you do in Power BI will be good quality and fit for purpose. At the end, we will have an exercise on a data model together with your contribution. But first of all, we will learn the process how to get there. And I saw even this is not the first time. You already had past sessions, for example, about career opportunities and other things that are not happening inside of Power BI. Now let's see, what is the motivation of this session? So I'm a Power BI architect. Previously, I've been a Power BI consultant. And in these roles, I've seen many data models from developers at different levels. And there are some issues, I would say, that I observed frequently. So that's why I designed this process in order to avoid as many as possible of them. And this will also guide you to a good solution once you are creating reports in Power BI. So first, let's have a look at why solutions actually fail. And I've observed a few things. My impression is that one reason is that many Power BI developers are self-taught. Not everyone joins such good classes like at Urbisage, or there are also some digital training paths like in Pluralsight or Udemy, some structured lessons, but instead many are self-taught. Maybe they have done Excel before and then transition to Power BI and just get started until they are stuck somewhere. And then they are searching for some tutorials with a focused solution on the problem where they are stuck. Or they are placing questions in Microsoft Power BI or meanwhile Microsoft Fabric community. And these questions are all very often very problem specific, not questioning the underlying approach, for example, the structure of the data model, but they're saying this is my measure, it doesn't produce the result I want to see, how to fix it. But it's not questioning the underlying data model. And what I can see is that there are in tutorials you often find a solution that is demonstrating something based on a often simple but good data model, but it's already in place. So the tutorial does not teach you how to get to a good data model. And the tutorials often just teach a very, very specific, small solution in 10, 15 minutes. Again, just pointing out what is needed in order to solve this problem or to implement this feature that the tutorial is presenting. And then also tutorials are often using oversimplification. They're just showing a sunny day case. And all this is valid, of course, that there is demand for such tutorials. And obviously, they are used and they are appreciated. But at the bottom line, if you only consume such tutorials and don't get an holistic overview, then you probably will fail at building a good data model, at least once the source data is getting a bit more complex and coming from different sources, for example. And another reason that I think is causing this observation is that in certifications, like for example, in the Microsoft DP 300 certification, also the test approach is focusing on small specific questions and also not on the holistic approach. So let's now see how we can overcome this. Before I do so, let me see whether I can somehow hide my taskbar. Okay, doesn't seem that it wants to disappear. Then let's just go on. So this concept, I call it the process house, and it's a assembly or of 12 steps that I recommend doing step by step when approaching a reporting project. And the first one is cultures and values, which means that the fundament of a good project and a good solution is that you align with the stakeholders and the team on common core values that have the goal to produce a good outcome. And among them is commitment for a good, high quality solutions, not just doing a job. It includes efficient communication. An example of inefficient communication is something I frequently observe is, for example, that developers or users just saying, my numbers are wrong, what is wrong in my report? But they are not telling why they think the number is wrong and what is their expectation of a correct number. So they're just saying that the model is wrong, and then I need to guess what is wrong about the model and what is the actual requirement. So efficiently would be to communicate exactly what you observed and exactly what is your observation, for example. Then, of course, collaboration. For example, I think you cannot create a good report if you're just getting handed over some requirements from the business department, and then you need to create a report. But the business department is not available for any questions you have about the requirements. So usually there will be some questions, or you have produced some outcome and you want some feedback. So people need to be available. The team needs to be available in order to be successful. You could support each other, and transparency in the communication is also very useful, and also in the project progress. And if there are some problems, make this transparent and communicate. Also, embracing new features. In Power BI, for example, you can pick up the evolution of software and make use of this in your software, in your own report. And of course, continuous learning needs to be part of the journey. If you're a beginner, of course, it's learning the fundamentals. But even if you're a senior, Power BI is coming with new functionality all the time. So you need to keep learning these new features to create the best possible outcome. And of course, I think the most important value is love the outcome. And so be committed to produce something good. And you can see in the outcome, in the report, whether the developer loved the outcome or just did a job. For example, you can see whether objects like the visuals and text boxes and so on, are they named, or is this just random default names? Are the tables and fields in the semantic model view nicely arranged, or is it just default arrangement? Do you have descriptions in the fields? Are measures arranged in folders and so on? So you clearly can see if a model is clean and created with attention to detail and with love for the outcome or not. Then the next step is to be aware of a common BI terminology. So these are the technical terms, and often you already have a definition in the companies, or you can just pick some from the textbooks. But there are a few that I want to point out because there are often misunderstandings, because people have a different understanding of what it is, and that's why it's so important to define them. And maybe some of the terms are not so familiar to everyone in the project at all, and then it's also very helpful to have a definition where I can just look up what is it. And one of them is a measure. Probably being a Power BI developer yourself, you think of a measure as a piece of DAX code that calculates a performance indicator. But in general data warehousing, a measure is the column in the fact table that contains the values. So for a data warehouse developer or data engineer, usually a measure would be a column in a fact table. For the Power BI developer, it would usually be a piece of code calculating a performance indicator. So maybe what I often do is that when talking about measures in Power BI, I specifically say that this is a DAX measure or a Power BI measure, so that I have a clear definition. Another word that is frequently mixed up is a dashboard. Probably you know in Power BI there is an asset type that is called dashboard, and there's a different asset type which is called report. So report is what you create in Power BI desktop, and business users often refer to a Power BI report as a dashboard. So it's helpful to define what word do you want to use. What do you mean when talking about a dashboard? Is this every report? Is this a specific kind of report, or is it a dashboard in the terms of a Power BI, the dashboard in the Power BI service? So this is the technical terms, and since the technical terms are often close to the textbooks, so they might already be known, the business glossary is more specific to the business, and thus I would say this is even more important, that you have a clear definition of business terms, and you can refer to them when talking to the business stakeholders. And among them is, of course, the definition of the KPIs or performance indicators, and there should always be a definition in natural language. What does this mean? This is not a formula, but like here in this example, a natural language definition of a performance indicator could be customer acquisition rate measures the percentage of new customers acquired in a given period. And then if it's a KPI, you can, of course, also provide or even should provide the formula. But there are also other business terms that are important to be defined. So, for example, I can think of the terms customer, account, or contact. You can think for yourself or for project that you have already been working on. Is it clear what is a customer, what is an account, and what is a contact, and what is their relationship? And this might be specific to the company or to the business for which you're creating the report. And such things should be defined so that also when creating the data model, it's clear. Is each customer one account? Can there be multiple accounts per customer? Can there be multiple contacts per account? And so on. But the good news is that these first three layers, culture and values, common BI terminology, and business glossary, you usually, when creating a report, don't need to start from scratch. In many companies, at least part of this is already available. Maybe during your requirement analysis and throughout your reporting project, you will extend this documentation, or maybe you are the first one, and then of course you need to start from scratch. But once this is already available, of course, you reuse what is already there. And this is not just nice to have. This is important to make sure that, for example, the definition of a specific KPI is the same in all reports. So that this is one important step to make sure that you will also have the benefit that you want from using Power BI. And one of them is that you have trusted numbers, that you have the same numbers across all reports. So if you're looking at a specific KPI in different reports, it's the same number, it's the same calculation, and that's what we call a single source of truth. So this is very important so that business users trust your reports, and not everyone comes with a different number for the same question. And then the next step is requirements analysis. And now here at this step, we are getting project specific. And what do you experience in your projects? Often you can also think about projects you've done in the past. What I've seen often when report projects are started, what you get is either something like a deck of PowerPoint slides describing a few report pages or visuals, maybe with a more or less bit background information, or sometimes you get an Excel file showing a dashboard that users want to have in Power BI. or people are showing you a Excel file that they've used in the past and they just want to replace it with a Power BI report. But I would recommend doing a bit more. And that is, you should start with the actual goal. So is it replacing some existing report, or is it something new? And why do you do this project? So what is the actual goal? What do you want to achieve with the report? Not just what should the report look like. And then the next thing I would add is the scope. By the way, at the end, we'll get a link to a handout, and all these steps will be described there. So you can look all these steps up there, what I'm telling you. And the scope is important to describe not only what should be part of the report, but also to define what should not be part of the report. And so that you can clearly discuss with the user what do you need. Otherwise, an effect will be there often, which is called scope creeping, which means that once the users see the report, they want to add more and more and more requirements. And of course, there's nothing wrong about this as long as there's enough budget and this is relevant requirements. But you should be aware of what is the scope of the report. And this will also help you to select the relevant data and to remove the irrelevant data, so that your data set will stay clean. Then you would include the personas. Personas means who are the users. Be aware of who are the users, what are their expectations, what are their skills. Also, what is their work environment? For example, are they working on mobile? Are they working on a mobile connection, or maybe even with a mobile device? This is already a hint for your implementation, that you might also want to test it in the mobile app of Power BI and not just in the web browser. So document these assumptions. Then get to the business process. Define in which business process the report will be used. So what is the reason why people are using the report, and what should be the outcome from using the report? And then, of course, define the KPIs that should be seen in there. Here at the bottom right, you can see a small example of one way you could do this. And you can see this is not a Power BI dashboard. This is just some descriptions. What is the name of the KPI? What is the purpose of the KPI? Then a formula, then targets. So meaning what values show that this is a good, healthy value, and what show that this is a bad value. Then describe who is using these measures and for what, for example. And then, of course, you have the functional requirements. Functional requirements, what does the user actually need to do in the report? Or what features does the report need to provide? For example, which filters do you need? Which visuals do you need, and by what perspective? For example, by customer or by product or whatever. I think functional requirements is what is in most cases to some degree available, because they are just shown in the mock-ups or PowerPoint slides or Excel files that you get. What is not so clear in many projects, but also important, is the so-called non-functional requirements. Non-functional requirements include how much data do you expect to accumulate in the file over time. For example, you can define that you need the last 3 years of data or the last 10 years of data, so that you can also implement in the file that you can cut off the data that is older than 3 years, and that you can also test with the appropriate amount of data. If you know you need 3 years of data, you don't need to test with 10 years of data, for example. And also you can improve performance to that level that it works with the amount of data expected. So this gives you hints about with what data do you need to test, but also behaviors that you want to implement, like, for example, cutting off the data history. And this includes also things like security requirements, for example, what row-level security roles do you want to implement for the users? Yeah, and then besides what needs to be in the requirement, of course, it's an important question how to document them. So I would highly recommend to use a template. This will help you with a structured approach. And in the handout, there are links to different templates, including this KPI canvas, but also other templates to document requirements. And of course, you can choose the way how you want to do it. Do you just want to write a Word document, for example, or you can also use some more collaborative tools like a SharePoint list organizing the requirements, or OneNote in the Microsoft universe, or here a task board using Jira in project management, or Microsoft Planner. Each requirement then could be a task on the Microsoft Planner board, for example. But make sure the document is complete enough and good enough and clear enough so that a future developer, maybe in a year or two, or maybe even the future you, if you need to add a functionality later, that you can still understand what was the requirement, why was the report built the way it is built, and how do I need to change the report in order to implement a new requirement. And always pay attention to a complete and clear wording. So use language that is understood by everyone in the project. So this step, documenting, gathering, documenting the requirements and doing this as complete as necessary, is very fundamental, so that you are aligned in the project and that you know what is expected. Then the next step is already part of the analysis, but the conceptual data model will still primarily help you understanding the requirements. It gives you a high-level perspective and is used for discussion with the business users. So to clarify terminology, for example, these customer account contact relationships could be modeled here and could be documented. What is their relationship? You can see a small example here. Customer can be a retailer. Retailer has one or more outlets. An outlet belongs to a region, and a customer belongs to one or more regions. And this is a small example of a conceptual data model. And as you can see, the terminology here, this is all language from the business department. So here you don't use any table names or field names from a database. This is all just natural language and is for the purpose of clarification with the business. And if this sounds like a lot of work for you doing all these steps, this conceptual data model is one step where I would recommend, or where I would say I would probably not model everything that is relevant for the requirement, but just focus on things that are useful for clarification. The one thing that I would highly recommend to do it in a complete way is this so-called bus matrix. So I first read about this in the book from Ralph Kimball, the Data Warehouse Toolkit, which I can highly recommend. So this is the basic textbook about dimensional data modeling since the 1990s, and still valid and still fundamental for Power BI data modeling. And he describes a concept called bus matrix. So that's what it looked like. The purpose of the bus matrix is to define fact tables and dimensions that that are used across multiple reports. So if you think about a whole company, not just a single report, then there is a lot of things that you can reuse. For example, if you already have created a customer table or a product table or a date table, or sometimes it's also called calendar table, then that should be the same table for all reports where you need date or customer or product or whatever the dimensions are. So this is something you would also, that you, once it's created, you only would extend this, or you would just look up what you already have. And that's also why it's so super important and useful to do this completely and to keep this updated, because then maybe you can just look up, maybe everything you need is already there. And then you can just create, load a data model and create a report from this. And if you need to add something new or start from scratch, of course, you add what you need for your report. Then there's two more things that you would usually do here. This is a very simple example. But if you have dimensions at or fact tables at different grains, so for example, if you have sales data on daily level, but you have budget planning only on monthly level, then you would also note here that here your sales are on daily level. And let's see, is there something? Yeah, here, for example, the forecast might be on monthly level. So then you would just note here daily and monthly, and then you already can see that you can combine these data only on monthly level. So that's the bus matrix. That's one concept that I can highly recommend. And so the detailed description is, of course, in the textbook, but you will also get the link to this web article. Then the next step is the logical data model. And the logical data model is what you probably know as the star schema. The logical data model still is technology agnostic. So that means if you create the concept of the star schema, this is independent of whether you want to implement this in Power BI or in Qlik or in any other BI tool. Up to this step, logical data model, or all these previous steps, including the logical data model, they are all still independent from your BI tool. So actually, you would not even need to decide whether to use Power BI or some other tools up to this level. You don't need to know about the exact source data that you have. All this is driven by the requirements. So what the logical data model looks like is not driven by the source data that you want to load into the model, but it's driven by the requirements. Which reporting questions does the report need to answer? That defines the dimensions and fields and fact tables that you need in your data model. And then this logical data model becomes the blueprint for your implementation in Power BI. And this is something I can highly recommend. First, design the logical data model. You can use entity relationship diagram modeling tools. There are many out there, and the handout is an example of what you can use. But do this concept first if you have nothing else, in a drawing tool or in a entity relationship diagram modeling tool, and not in Power BI. Don't start here already with the real data. First, get a clear picture of where you want to get when starting in Power BI. So here you can see the relationships already, cardinalities, meaning where do you have the one end and the many end of the relationships. And you can also define already what are your key columns, the ones on which you create the relationships. For example, which column for identifies a customer, for example. Probably not the name, but rather something like a customer number. You need to check what is available in your or used in the business for which you're creating the report. Then in the next step, we are getting technically. Here we turn the logical data model in something that is specific for the technology that you're using. So here, this model is specific to that we want to use Power BI. For example, in Power BI, you cannot create relationships between two tables based on multiple columns. So relationships always need to be based on a single column in each table. And if your source data has a structure that you would need a multi-column relationship, you need to introduce an additional column, which we would call a surrogate key in BI, to create the single column relationship, which is specific to this technology. So this is very, very popular concept in data warehousing, but for some tools it's mandatory, like Power BI. For other tools like Qlik, they can also create multi-column relationships. And you might want to introduce some additional helper columns in your calendar table to support time intelligence calculations. You might want to decide whether you need some historization in the dimension tables, which are called slowly changing dimensions. That means, for example, if a customer moves to a different address, do you want to reflect this in your data, and how? And that would be modeled here. Then maybe you can also define some aggregations or allocations. This is like in the previous example, if you have, if you want to compare data that you have in the source on daily level, but for the report, you only need it on the monthly level, you can already do the monthly aggregation in the data model. And then you don't need to do it in DAX measures anymore. And then your DAX measures will be faster and your data model will be smaller. And there's one important rule. If you can do it in the data model, for example, in Power Query, then do it there and not in DAX measures. Do you have, maybe you can send a reply in the chat. Do you have an idea why it's so popular to do things in DAX measures rather than to do it in a data model? At least that's my observation. Does anyone have an idea? Let me see.
Okay, is it okay if I share my own opinion of what I've heard people say, and also just there's also a question. Do you want me to read the question out first, or should I?
Yeah, I already see here. There's one question more about the surrogate keys here. We can talk more about the surrogate keys in a moment, and then first answer the question, because it seems like an easy fix. Yes, that's pretty correctly summarizes the situation. But to be honest, my experience is indeed it's not an easy fix. Often, if it didn't get the data model clean, it makes the DAX measure much harder. But the reason I would say is, so usually you have a source system, then you have a data warehouse, then you have some Power Query and the data model in Power BI, and then you have the DAX measures, and then you have the visuals. And often the best place to do something would be in the data warehouse. But maybe the Power BI developer is not the same person as the data engineer to do something in the data warehouse. Or there is some approval process to get some changes into the data warehouse. And then developers think, oh, let's skip this step. Let's be lazy. It's too much effort to do it there. I can do it in Power BI. And then once you are in the Power Query label, you think, oh, that's too complicated to do here. I can do it in DAX. Let's do it in DAX. And once you're in DAX, there is no later stage anymore to which you can push this based on your laziness. And then you need to do it in DAX. And that's why we see so many complicated solutions in DAX, because that's where you must do it there is no other location where you can do it if you didn't do it before. And now let's see. Yeah, there is a concern regarding the data model size. Yes, that's true. Of course, this is something you need to look at. You can check the file size. I think the limitation is somewhere around 1 gigabyte. And if this is indeed you're approaching this size, you need to be careful. But my experience is also really closely look at what is the file size and what fields do you have in there. I've already seen files where we're asking the developer, why didn't you introduce this pre-calculated column, for example? It would make the calculation so much easier or so much faster. And then the answer is it increases the data model size. And then I review the data model, and then I see there are dozens of fields in there that are not needed, actually, that you could just remove. And then you would save so much more space than you actually invest for this one additional column that you introduce. So that is really important, that you don't just blindly try to save additional columns before having really cleaned up your data model to what you actually need for your report. And my experience is then very often you can invest wisely into useful columns, and after you removed columns you don't really need. That's my recommendation. And then there was a question regarding the surrogate keys. So surrogate key is, let's just think about how could you implement this in Power Query. A surrogate key is, let's say, you have in the data warehouse, you could have a table that requires 2 columns to uniquely identify a record. So, for example, let's say you have a person, could be an employee or customer or whatever, an individual, and the name would probably not be unique because a different person could, by chance, have the same name, but maybe the name and the date of birth, or the name and the place of birth and the date of birth, then would be a unique key that would uniquely identify the person. But in Power BI data models, you cannot create a relationship that is based on the name and the birth date. You need a single column. And then maybe you have some fact data, maybe it's employees and their payments is your fact data. Then you cannot create a relationship based on the name and the birth date to the fact table. Instead, you could in Power Query use an index column so that these employees just get numbers, and then you could, I think in Power Query the function is called merge. You could merge this key on the fact table, and then you have this numeric column to create the relationship. That's a surrogate key. And of course, often you have, for example, something like an employee number or customer number, which is already unique. But latest, when introducing slowly changing dimensions, which would be changes to the customer data, but it's not a change of the customer number, for example, then the customer number would also not uniquely identify a version of the customer record. And then again, you need a surrogate key. So a surrogate key is usually the implementation is either just a number, or in big data technology, you often use a GUID, which is this long number using decimal numbers and or hexadecimal places. For example, you see it in the Power BI report URL. The report is identified with the so-called GUID, and that's also a technology that you often use for surrogate keys today. There's another mention in chat. One case I know of is when the model is to support multiple records, so the data engineers and database architects don't always want to make changes to just one for just one report need. Yeah, okay. In this case, I still would recommend, if it's reasonable, to do this rather in the data model than in the measure. You can still do it in Power Query. And often you have a policy in the companies, in the data warehouses, that, for example, you can add views to the data warehouse. A view in SQL is something like a stored query, so just a SQL code, but not a duplication of data. And then you can introduce a view that maybe, for example, already contains the aggregation that you want to load in your data model, and this is then a change that is accepted in the data warehouse. Okay, then next step, we are still doing the concept. Yeah, we are still not in Power BI in our project. Is to create a mock-up or a draft of what the report page, the visualization should look like. And this is often something you already get from the users at a pretty early stage, because this is their idea of the product that you will deliver, report pages. And here again, I still would review with, at least I would review with the users what will be their workflow, what will be their interactions that they want to do with the report, and then apply a best practice structure. So, for example, often you start with an overview page summarizing KPIs and their thresholds, so that you can see what is what needs attention and what is on track, and then you would dive deeper where needed. If something is not on track, you would provide details or trends or something. And you can use, besides Power BI or Excel or PowerPoint, one very popular tool is Figma. An advantage of this tool is that it is already ready for designing web pages, for example. And that means if you create some drawings, for example, you can export them in the SVG or PNG format, and then you can create, for example, backgrounds or buttons or something, and you can export them from Figma and use them in your Power BI report, actually. Then, of course, you can use a template for creating these design mockups, so that in a company, not every report looks different, but they're based on the same visual layout. You can use a common design language. So actually, that's something I know some companies invest a lot on defining such a common design language. One that is pretty popular is IBCS, that is International Business Communication Standard, and this predefines some colors and some visual design, how to convey certain data and certain messages. Then, of course, use appropriate visuals. So, for example, what I frequently see is people using a funnel chart to have a fancy bar chart. But a funnel chart, actually, the idea of a funnel chart is that the next step is shows a part of the previous step. So anything that is in a later step or level in the funnel chart has previously been in a previous step. That's what you would usually express with a funnel chart. So that's what I recommend using it for, and not for anything just because it is a fancy way of showing data. Then consistent colors. Yeah, there I have a good recommendation in Power BI. For example, if you have product groups in a company, then you can store colors per product group in the data table, and then with the measure, you can apply these columns in every visual where you show product groups, and then every product group in every visual in every report appears in the same color. So that's a color language that users can easily understand and follow across reports. And then you may need pay attention to accessibility, like some challenges with color blindness, for example. And now you are ready to start in Power BI. Now you actually do the Power BI implementation. And there are a few things I do recommend. And you can note them or remember them, because in the exercise, you will be asked to spot them. And of course, here again, Roger's maxim is what we already said. Implement things as early as possible. If you can do it in the data warehouse, do it there, not later. If you can do it in Power Query, do it there, not in DAX. And do only in DAX what needs to be done in DAX, because you need some dynamic calculation which reacts on filtering, for example. Then avoid redundant data, which means having multiple columns containing the same information. Here, yeah, this is a specific way what you can see. Avoid unused or duplicate columns. Avoid snowflake data structure, which means you attach an additional dimension table to a dimension table. We will see this in the example. Avoid direct relationships between fact tables. So you usually only have relationships between dimensions and facts in a star schema. We will also see how to get rid of them. Avoid many-to-many relationships if possible. They are not in general wrong, but I see them way more frequently in reports than they are actually needed. And I would also recommend not to create tables from DAX in Power BI. I would rather recommend to create them from Power Query or even more upstream in a data warehouse if possible. So then you have the data model. And of course, you also need to create the report, the visual report. And here I do recommend basically to stick to the standards as much as possible. Don't invent some fancy things and don't show things in a different way everywhere just to show different capabilities. Use standards. Use the filter pane, for example. I see so many users that don't even know about the filter pane, and instead they are putting so many slicers on the pages, wasting your space. Sometimes they're needed to implement certain functionality, of course, but if it's sufficient to use the filter pane, you can just use the filter pane. Everyone, and then rather teach your users where to find it, and then there's the filter pane, and it's at the same place in every report. Then make sure I would emphasize performance over the latest fancy visualization hack. And performance is the better, the fewer measures you need, the smaller the number of visuals is. For example, you can make use of the new card visual instead of putting a dozen of individual old card visuals on a report page. And also make sure this will also help with maintainability. Having fewer visuals makes changes easier, makes it easier to understand the report if you need to change it in a year or two. So keep everything simple. Apply the functionality that is already there in Power BI. And also avoid interactions that the user shouldn't do anyway. Like, for example, if between separate visuals cross-filtering should not be allowed or doesn't make sense, you should also turn it off. The default behavior is that it's on, but you can turn it off. So just keep your report clean and turn off functionality that is not needed. So then, still, there are steps that you should pay attention to. So now your report is done. You should not just throw it over the fence and tell your user it's done. Do you like it? Maybe, but the rollout should also be a process, an organized process, which includes acceptance tests, user training, some documentation for the user, where they can look up how to use the report, and also to monitor, is it used at all? Do users accept it? Do you need to change something that they can use it? Monitor for failure, especially in the data refresh, And then in many organizations, after you've developed the report, you hand over the report to the IT support. So if there is a refresh failure, then IT support will take care. Often you have a phase called hypercare right after release, where you have some extended awareness and resources to help the user with problems in the beginning until they are resolved. And of course, users need to know whom to contact in case there is a failure. Yeah, and then of course, document what you have learned throughout the project and keep up with new things in Power BI, continue your learning journey. Maybe if you're a beginner, you still learn some fundamentals and keep your maturity growing. So this is something that will probably continue after each project you did. Then I think, Michael, how do you deal with the time? So I have a few. What I would
Sure,
have now.
no problem. You can go ahead as long as it's okay by you. It's okay by us.
Yeah, it's okay by me. So, but what I would recommend. So here we have a small summary. What you see is, if you want to do your report well, there's a lot of preparation you do outside of Power BI. In the whole process, only the actual implementation in Power BI is done in Power BI itself, and there's a lot to prepare. But my experience is, what I observe is that there are projects, real life probably. There are projects where you get these requirements, you get a PowerPoint slide deck from the business department, what they want to have, and then you start in Power BI. My experience is doing all these steps. If the report is a bit more complex and there are a few things in there that need clarification, then following the process is often much faster than starting with Power BI. Then you're running into trouble, then you're bug fixing them, then you're changing the report, you're getting feedback from the users, and they're still not fine with it. And I've seen reports that with the approach of skipping all these steps, they took like 12 months for something that could have been done in 3 months if you followed the process. So I clearly would say that this is not a waste of time, but it helps you to do as many things as possible first time right. So you don't need that many loops to clarify and refine and change the implementation, because you only start the implementation once you're clear about what you need and what the solution should look like. Yeah, so looking at the time, of course, Michael, we can set up another session for now actually learning how to put this into practice. But what we can still do today is we can just jump to the exercise. So maybe you can just think about what you can already spot in the data model that I will show you, what you would improve, and where you would still like to learn something, how to do it or why to do it. So that would be the findings that we frequently see, and that would be a data model. And now you are open, or the chat is open, that you tell me things that you spot in this data model that you would change in order to turn it into a clean, efficient, easy to read star schema. So maybe, first of all, maybe who of you can relate to such kind of data model? This is honestly from a real life project, and it's also just a subset. So there, in the real life project, there are many more tables around this. But I have just picked this number of tables because they already show very typical observations that I have in reports. And now you can tell me whether you can relate to this. and what you would change. There are snowflakes in there. Yeah, exactly. Do you also have an idea what you would do instead? Combine, exactly. So the first finding that we have found is here, these three tables create a snowflake. Probably it's a hierarchy, customer account address. In Power BI, these would all be attributes of the customer dimension. So you would merge these three. What else have we in there? Avoid many-to-many relationships. Yes. Share the meeting invite. Do you mean the slides, or you will get the link to the slides definitely later. Once we have found the issues, and because the solution is in the slides, you will get the slides, of course, as well. Yeah. Now first of all let's check the many-to-many relationships. We have two types of many-to-many relationships in here. One is this one between, this is a dimension table customer, and this is a fact table, core plan objectives. And then there's another type of bidirectional relationships, which is here between fact tables even. Does anyone have an idea how you could avoid the many-to-many relationship between the dimension and the fact table? Rename columns, yeah, business-friendly names. That's true. So you can think about this. Meanwhile, I will explain something about the names. So the one naming issue that I would first address is here that we have called a table that is called hierarchy. Yeah? So it's a dimension table, and at least it's not like here in the snowflake pattern split across multiple tables, but actually that's the employee table. So I would call the table according to the entity, and then it would be the employee. But also, it's true that there are not business-friendly names, but the one constraint here is that this view in most tables, it's only showing the relationship columns anyway, so the key columns. And you would probably hide them in the actual data model, and this is not what is visible to the users. But so here, for example, you can see there are some visible columns that already have friendly names, week end, week start, for example. But everything that is visible to the user in the final data model, that's totally correct, should have friendly names. Then use keys, yes. So actually most of these columns are keys. Probably segment is not a key. But what you can see here regarding keys is that in this employee table, there is between the employee and the call attendee, it's using a different ID column than between, I think it was here between the, you can see it. I have this already. Here it's a column employee position ID, and here it's rating position ID, which is also the employee position ID. So we have two key columns identifying the same object, and this is really a waste of space. So if you want to keep your data file small, we just talked about adding new columns or not. If you want to keep it small, first of all, clean up such things. So here we have employee ID and employee position ID, and that's serving totally the same purpose. So you can remove one of these columns and replace here the employee position ID with the employee ID, and then that's your key column, your actual key column. Maybe the segment column might not be really a key, and there you would replace it with a key. Let's see, what else do we have in the responses meanwhile? Avoid duplicates in dimension table columns. Yeah, absolutely. So here in this table, as I said, there are probably not even key columns duplicate, but also some other attributes. Yeah, then maybe we can just go step by step through the findings that I had, and you can just check maybe in your head or on your notes, what you have also spotted. Minimize bidirectional relationships. There you can even get rid of all of them in this model. I totally agree. So we have this 1-to-1 relationship. So actually, this is just an extension of the table. You would just merge them into the customer table. Same for the snowflake as discussed. Then there's this many-to-many relationship. So what could you do here to clean this up? I mean, it's pretty obvious what was the intention of the developer. The intention was that customers are grouped into segments, and this call plan objectives tables is at segment grade, not at customer grade. So what you could do is you could create a separate segment dimension with a unique key for each segment, and in all other fact tables that are at customer level, since every customer belongs to a segment, you could also join a segment key on all other tables, and then you have a separate segment dimension, and you can filter all fact tables by the segment. Then, as I said here, the naming, we use a business-friendly entity name. Then we have these relationships between the fact tables. If we have proper relationships between the dimensions and the facts, we don't need them anyway at all. We would do the calculations in DAX where we need to apply filters from this table to this table, but we don't need them in the data model. Then there's auto-date timetables still on in Power BI, although we have date table. This is something that also can waste a lot of space in your file or in your database, because Power BI with auto date turned on, it creates an additional date table for every date column that you have anywhere in your model. And so I recommend turning this off and just having your own date dimension table. And as also already discussed here, we have 2 primary keys in the employee table. And primary keys is something where we say the cardinality is high. That means every employee has a different employee ID. For example, something with a low cardinality would be the gender. There's just 2, male and female. And that would be a low cardinality column. And getting rid in your data model of a high cardinality column always saves you a lot of space. So that makes your file really noticeably smaller, whereas just removing the gender column wouldn't change a lot. There's a question regarding avoiding the DAX table. In avoiding DAX tables, does it mean it's better to create a calendar table in Power Query than to create it using the calendar? Yeah, absolutely. The reason is, and especially you can create a DAX calendar using different functions in auto calendar, or you can use it in Power Query. The problem with the auto DAX, with the auto calendar table is that it looks throughout the whole model what is the oldest, the most past date, and what is the latest date. And often you have data sources where there is a very old date that should mark the unknown date. So for example, in Microsoft Business Central, the unknown date is represented as, I think, year 1753. So around 300 years ago, something like this. And that would mean auto calendar would create rows that the whole calendar for these hundreds of years, which makes a large calendar, a large file, and also slows down the report. So that's why I would recommend to create it in Power Query and to select the dates that you actually need. Maybe if you know in your source system you have these placeholder dates for the unknown date, replace them with some newer date. You still should use a date that represents the unknown date, but make sure, for example, if you load the last 5 years, that would be now starting 2018 or 19, then some date in 2017 could be defined as your unknown date, and then you can create a much smaller date table. And also it compresses better when you do something in Power Query rather than in DAX, and the file will get smaller. I think this answers the question regarding the date table. Yeah. Okay. Then we can have a look at. Is there anything else here? The auto date. Yeah, and the primary keys. So that's I think that were all the findings that I had, where I would at least say, without knowing anything more about the requirements or the data in the table. So often, if you see this is just the structure of the data of the columns and the relationships. If you look into the data, you sometimes can spot even more things that you can clean up. But just from the data model, this is what I would change. And here is a sample solution of what it looked like. So this is created with an entity relationship diagram modeling tool, and this tool does not allow to manually route the lines. But you can already see that now we only have the top row is the dimensions, and wait a second. The bottom row is the fact tables that we also saw in the data model. But now you can see all the dimensions only have a one end, and all the fact tables have the many ends. There are no more relationships directly between fact tables. And we have introduced this new segment table so that the relationship between the segment dimension and this call plan objectives fact table can become a one-to-many relationship. And in order to compare the call plan objectives against any other facts from any other fact table, they all have the segment key as well. So they are all related. And now this is a fact table, a dimension table that is related to multiple fact tables. Is what we call a conformed dimension, because you can now you have one common dimension that you can use to compare data from different fact tables. Yeah. Okay. So far, that's what I think what we can do or could do in 1 hour. If you have some feedback, you can. The chat is still open, and what I can offer is you can also give me feedback about additional topics that you would like to see, including how to prepare the data model in Power Query, or additional modeling exercises. For example, here how you could now actually implement this in Power Query so that you can do the changes from the original data model that we saw to the final solution, how to actually do this in Power Query, or how to do some DAX calculation, whatever you would be interested in. And maybe next quarter we can have another session.
Yeah,
and I can
good. Yeah,
meanwhile I can also send you the link to the download link, or maybe it's even here in a slide. Wait, here. So you can either use this QR code, but I think it's also a link. I just need to open the web browser. No, it indeed is a link that it initiates the download. So I need to check in the slide. Wait a second. Let's return to the slides. So this is the download link. And you can see, so it will, once you click on the link, it will in your web browser right away initiate the download, and then you will find it in your download folder. And you can see here, you have all the descriptions in there. And you also have all the best practices and how to modify the solutions, what we skipped now. And here, of course, also the findings and the solution. So, and you have a lot of links in there for additional processes or books or articles if you're interested in even more background information or fundamentals. I think there's a lot of information in there for you. I think, Michael, you will publish the video on YouTube, right?
Yes, correct. So by tomorrow, usually it should be up.
So I would offer that once the video is available on YouTube, of course, you can also comment there. If you have wishes for upcoming topics, you can also comment there.
Oh, I think for me personally, I might notify you faster on LinkedIn. So I'll even connect with you on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, but do you have any of your links you want us to share? I have shared your LinkedIn. I will share it again, but maybe you have other links you want us to share with people that can get them to keep in touch with resources you do. I don't know if you also have YouTube. Do you have other platforms you push content to?
I don't have a YouTube channel yet, but I think LinkedIn is the best to connect for now. There are also, you can check my I think it's called Post in English. You can check my channel. There is, for example, DAX learning content in there in YouTube, in LinkedIn, that you can browse and see whether you can learn something from that. And of course, you can get in touch with me there. So currently, I do not offer a normal consulting offer, since I'm internal employee at our company. But if there's anything I can help you with, so of course you can always contact me. I'm also a super user in the Power BI Fabric community, so you can also place questions there, for example, if you need help on something or have some ideas on topics you would like to hear about.
Okay, thank you. And about ideas of topic and feedback. So I am sharing a link to everyone. You can provide your feedback, and then we will pass the topic ideas or anything you want us to pass along to Martin. We'll pass them via this from your submission to this link. So Martin, I don't know if you're okay with 5 minutes. I've got 2 questions we ask all audiences. Okay, great. So, and also to let you know, we are happy to take up any other topic you want to present. So we are a ready audience. Every Sunday, there's always a session. So if you feel like you want to do a sequel to these or anything that you think is important, because that's the other thing. What I've taken away from this your session today is we tend to overlook a lot of things. You know, you mentioned the example of people going online to ask a question, but they leave out the context. They just ask, I'm having a problem at this stage. Whereas, you know, when they get an answer, the answer fixes what they asked for, but maybe there's a bigger problem to even the process they are taking. And so most beginners, most people who are learning, they think more about what is making their reports not to be okay. You know, they are saying if numbers are wrong, they're not. Someone says my figure is not wrong. So I think that we also like your approach where you have seen the full spectrum. You can pick a topic that you know it's important, that people don't pay attention to. That's the advantage of a technical community. People should be okay to learn something that they never even thought they needed to know. And that's the angle you have come at things. So I like that approach from you. That if you have a topic.
One topic that I could offer, maybe next quarter, because of course I need to prepare the things also, is one challenge what we saw in the exercise was this segment dimension, this one many-to-many relationship. And actually the problem behind this is that we have facts at a different grain. This means that they are at more or less detail. For example, you have data on monthly level and on daily level, or on product group level and on product level in different fact tables. And there are two techniques how to bring them together. One is aggregation, so you bring everything on the lower grain, and the other one is allocation, which means you bring everything on the higher grain. And this will simplify your data model, because you don't have to deal with this different grain anymore, or at least you have a plan how to deal with it. And that, my experience is that dealing with this different grain and different fact tables is often one reason why data models become complicated.
I agree. I'm even interested in that because it happens a lot with some of the reports we do where there's a sales header table, there's a sales, line table, there's a something header table, then a transactional value table, and sometimes you go between those two tables to get different things, and they are all at different level. The sales header, so yeah, that's great. If you want to do that as a session in future, I will tell them my colleague who originated the email, who sent you the coordinates, the schedule. I'll tell him to follow up with you. Thank you very much. So the two questions we have for you, we ask every speaker we bring on, and it's I'm going to ask you the two together, but there are two questions, so you can take your time to answer them the way you want. And question one is your journey. How did you get to this space? Because you are very unique. I see that commonly with the European experts we bring, not to say that maybe there are no good experts or that are of that same approach on that places, but I notice a lot more with European experts. You're good with the on the BI side, and then you're also good with the data, data modeling side. Some of them have experience from the whole SQL architecture, building BI on top of SQL directly, and some. In short, what I want to say is that you have an experience that is beyond just Power BI. You even mentioned Click. Not so many people even mention other tools. They are all thinking strictly, many are thinking strictly within a particular tool when they talk, but you always bring to that there's many sides. And so the question is, it would be nice to get the interesting journey that brought you to this level.
Actually, I didn't even do data analytics throughout my whole career. The first years I was working in application development. Actually, my first real position in the data analytics space was for GfK, which is what at that time was the largest German market research company, especially focusing on the durable goods. And we had a huge data warehouse for an international retail sales panel. And this was an Oracle based from the technology perspective, but it was a really, really huge project and database with many teams working on the single data warehouse. And there was also a time when Power BI entered the market. I mean, Power BI is not that old at all, so no one can have that much experience, but it's based on legacy SQL Server technology. So if you knew the technology before Power BI, of course, you had a head start with Power BI. And from there, since I enjoyed Power BI, I wanted to focus on Power BI, and then I started consulting positions. And that's what I can recommend, of course, to you if you want to learn more and broaden your knowledge, especially at the beginning of your career. Maybe every few years you want to look into a different company, and especially in a consulting role, of course, you will see even more companies. For example, in one of the companies where I worked, we had a department working on Click, so I had colleagues that worked on Click and showed me Click, and I saw what are the differences, what are the pros and cons for which tools, and all this broadens your perspective. Switching jobs from time to time. And the other thing is what I showed you on one of the very first slides on this culture and value slide is, of course, commitment and love what you're doing. So then you will read the books. Actually, you need to read the books. It's not enough to know the name or to have it on your shelf. Love to dive into the topics, and then of course watch videos or read blog posts and keep up to date. But you need something that gives you the holistic picture. And my experience is that this will rather be a book than a YouTube video.
Thank you. You've even answered the second question about what your advice is for people who want to also become very good and do this at a very high professional level. Thank you. Do you have maybe any additional tips for people who are trying to become better and do things professionally, at least not create problems, but solutions that are long-standing? Any more tips for them?
So yeah, I can give you one tip. My experience is also what you can sometimes see in YouTube channels or other resources on the internet is I see people, especially at the beginning of their career, focusing on some certifications that might bring them into a job, and then on skills that might be relevant for the job interview. But my experience is you can pass all these steps and still you are not capable of creating a holistic solution, because this is just not what is being asked, because the duration of such a exam or test or interview is limited, and each individual question is even way more limited. So the type of questions that you have in there, they are focusing on very specific tiny aspects of some technical implementations usually, and you can learn them, and or even just learn the answers to the questions by heart, and still once you are in the job, your colleagues will find out whether you're capable of actually creating a data model or not. So that's why I would recommend. It's of course somehow how you need to get your first job or advance in your career, but then also be aware that it's not enough to pass the certification, especially not if your learning approach is to practice the questions until you know the answers by heart. Also, learn the holistic picture and practice. And if as soon as you have a job, also get in contact with some more senior colleagues that know this stuff, and for example, ask for reviews. Don't try to hide that your solution is junior. As long as you're junior, no one expects that it's anything else. But in order to get better, ask experienced colleagues for reviews, for improvements, and then you will learn from them.
Thank you very much. And I think with that, we have come to the end of today's session. Thanks a lot, Martin. And thanks to everyone who's been part of today's session. And I've shared Martin's LinkedIn. Connect with him. He has I think you call it post. He has posts that I don't know if you also do a series, but he regularly posts on his knowledge findings, things to help the community. So you benefit from reading his posts. And next week we'll meet again. By tomorrow, the recording of this session will be up live, and you can watch the recording. And once again, thank you very much, Martin. It's been an honor to have you. And what you presented to us, I like when you said that at the beginning, you mentioned that we are already used to being shown different sides to things, and I like that this is really very different from what most of the time we get, where someone is showing us like there's a whole lot of things that needs to happen outside of Power BI. And I like the way you highlighted the part that is really the part that happens in Power BI, and it's important to the success of any real world project. Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone. Thank you to everybody who participated in the the questions and the exercise. Amos, Jennifer, DF, and everybody that is been in the session to the end. See you all next week. Bye.
Thank you for the invite, and I can promise you next time we do something in Power BI with code.
No. We want what you give us, according to you, what you think is valuable. So yes, anything you find you consider valuable is valuable to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.